The children noticed first. In playgrounds across 6 continents, small fingers pointed upward at shapes that blocked the afternoon sun. Teachers called students inside. Parents grabbed phones. Within minutes, the world understood that everything had changed forever. 1,200 warships hung above Earth like a funeral shroud. They stretched from horizon to horizon over every major city, their hulls darker than anything human engineers had ever built. No sound came from them. No light escaped their surfaces. They simply existed, impossibly large, impossibly present. Commander Yalis watched the chaos unfold on her observation screens with the patience of a predator who had done this 23 times before. She knew exactly what came next. The panic, the prayers, the desperate broadcasts begging for mercy. She had conquered worlds with nothing more than fear and time. The Dravine Collective had perfected submission across 400 star systems. They never fired first. They never needed to. Their method was simple. Arrive with overwhelming force, broadcast demands continuously, and wait for civilizations to break under the psychological pressure. Species that evolved through cooperation always surrendered. Species that valued their children always knelt. The pattern never failed. Begin the ultimatum, Yalis commanded. Every screen on Earth flickered. Every radio crackled. Every phone buzzed with the same message, translated into every human language. People of Earth, you have 7 days. Kneel before the Dravine Collective and join our empire's servants. Refuse, and your world will be erased from existence. This is not negotiation. This is mercy. 7 days. The message repeated every 15 minutes. In Geneva, world leaders gathered in an underground bunker built for exactly this kind of nightmare. Presidents shouted at generals. Prime ministers demanded options. Religious leaders prayed for guidance. The room smelled of sweat and fear and coffee that nobody remembered to drink. Admiral Rosario Mendez sat quietly in the corner, watching the chaos with tired eyes. At 58 years old, he had commanded fleets, survived wars, and buried friends. He understood something the younger leaders did not. Panic was exactly what the enemy wanted. A Norwegian woman pushed through the crowd toward him. Dr. Ingrid Halvorsen carried no briefcase, no papers, no weapons. She carried only an idea. Admiral, I need 5 minutes. The world is ending, Doctor. Speak fast. Halvorsen pulled a chair close and spoke softly enough that only Mendez could hear. They're using psychological warfare. Every species they have conquered broke within 48 hours. They broadcast threats until civilizations tear themselves apart with fear. But their entire strategy depends on one thing, which is response. They need us to react, to beg, to negotiate, to fracture into factions fighting over whether to surrender. Their weapons are designed to amplify our own fear back at us. Halvorsen paused. What if we give them nothing? Mendez leaned forward. Explain. Global coordinated silence. No broadcasts. No responses. No diplomatic channels. We go completely dark and let them wonder what we are planning. They have never faced a species that refused to acknowledge them. You want 7 billion people to stay silent for 7 days. I want to use their weapon against them. Silence is not surrender, Admiral. Silence is control. Mendez studied her face for a long moment. Then he stood and walked toward the podium where leaders still argued about surrender terms. Everyone stopped. The room fell quiet. Mendez had that effect on people. I'm going to propose something that will sound insane. But before you reject it, I want you to consider one fact. These aliens have conquered 400 worlds using fear. Not weapons. Fear. They expect us to panic because every species before us panicked. They expect us to fracture because division is human nature. He paused, letting the words settle. What if we do neither? What if we give them the one thing no species has ever given them? Absolute silence. The French president laughed bitterly. You want us to ignore an invasion fleet? I want us to make them wonder if we are afraid at all. I want them to spend 7 days staring at a planet that refuses to acknowledge their existence. I want them to feel what every bully feels when their victim simply walks away. Dr. Halvorsen stepped forward. Their psychological models depend on feedback loops. Without our fear reflected back at them, their confidence will erode. They will begin questioning everything. Silence is not passive. Silence is a weapon. Arguments erupted again, but something had shifted. The idea spread through the room like a spark catching dry wood. Within 3 hours, every nation on Earth had agreed to the impossible, coordinated global silence. No broadcasts, no responses, no negotiations. Humanity would speak with one voice by speaking with no voice at all. Aboard her flagship, Commander Yalis waited for the begging to begin. Her communication officers monitored every frequency. Her translators stood ready to process surrender requests. The screens remained empty. The frequencies remained silent. Yalis checked the time. For hours since the ultimatum. Every other species had broken by now, flooding her channels with pleas and offers. But Earth sent nothing. She assumed technical difficulties and ordered diagnostics. The equipment worked perfectly. She watched the planet below, its cities still lit, its people still moving through their lives. Somewhere down there, 7 billion beings had received her ultimatum, and not one of them had answered. Yalis felt something she had not felt in decades of conquest. She felt uncertain. Perhaps they need more time, her second-in-command offered. Perhaps, Yalis agreed. But deep in her chest, where instinct lived older than logic, something whispered that this world was different. Something whispered that silence meant something she did not yet understand. She pushed the thought away and waited for the screaming to begin. It never did. 47 hours without a single transmission. Yalis stood before the communication array, her clawed fingers tapping against the console in a rhythm she did not notice. Behind her, technicians ran diagnostics for the 12th time. The equipment functioned perfectly. Every sensor worked. Every frequency remained open. Earth simply chose not to use them. Commander, perhaps they lack the technology to respond, a junior officer suggested. Yalis turned slowly. They broadcast entertainment signals across their entire star system. They have sent machines to other planets. They argue with each other constantly across global networks. She gestured at the silent screens. They can respond. They're choosing not to. The officer had no answer for that. Yalis ordered a demonstration of power. If words would not break them, perhaps actions would. A Dravine warship descended toward an uninhabited island in Earth's largest ocean and reduced it to ash with a single sustained beam. Satellites recorded everything. News networks that had gone dark surely captured the footage. She waited for the terror to follow, for the desperate calls begging them to stop. The frequencies remained silent. On the ground, in a military post outside Lagos, Private Okonkwo watched the destruction through field glasses. The flash lit the horizon for 3 seconds before fading. Around him, 200 soldiers stood at their positions, faces grim but steady. No one spoke. Orders had been clear. No verbal communication, no radio transmissions, no signals of any kind that might reach the ships above. They used hand signals developed in the first hours of the silence. They wrote notes on paper and burned them after reading. They communicated through presence alone. Okonkwo was 23 years old. He had joined the military to pay for his sister's education. He had never expected to face an alien invasion. Fear lived in his chest like a cold stone, but something else lived there too. Something that felt like defiance. He looked at the soldiers around him. Yoruba, Igbo, Hausa, others from tribes that had fought each other for centuries. Today they stood together in silence, united by something larger than history. The aliens had given humanity something it had never achieved alone, complete global unity. The irony was not lost on him. Aboard the flagship, Yalis requested historical records from the collective's archives. She needed to understand the species. She needed to find weakness. The records painted a disturbing picture. Humans had a long history of resistance against superior forces. They had fought occupations that lasted generations. They had built underground movements that survived decades of oppression. They had developed something called passive resistance that had toppled empires without weapons. And they had a phrase that kept appearing in the translations, the silent treatment. Yalis read the explanation 3 times. Humans deliberately withheld communication as a form of psychological punishment. They understood that silence could be more painful than words. They used absence as a weapon. She closed the file and stared at the planet below. Day 2 ended with no response. The Dravine fleet maintained position, broadcasting ultimatums every 15 minutes into a void that swallowed them whole. Dr. Halvorsen monitored Dravine communications from the Geneva bunker. Their encryption was strong, but not unbreakable. Human intelligence agencies had been working on it since the fleet arrived. They are confused, she reported to Admiral Mendez. Their internal messages show increasing requests for guidance. No commander in their recorded history has faced this situation. Mendez nodded slowly. How long before confusion becomes fear? Impossible to predict precisely, but they rely on patterns. We have broken every pattern they know. Eventually, the absence of expected behavior creates anxiety. The longer we maintain silence, the more their confidence erodes. And our people, can they hold? Halvorsen pulled up global reports. Compliance with the silence order exceeded 97%. A few isolated broadcasts had escaped, quickly silenced by neighbors and authorities. Humanity, for perhaps the first time in its existence, was acting as one. They can hold, she said. Fear unites or divides. The aliens expected division. They got unity instead. In orbit, Yalis called her first council of officers. Theories, she demanded. Why are they silent? They are planning an attack, one officer suggested. With what weapons? We have scanned every military installation. They cannot threaten us. Perhaps they're negotiating internally, deciding who will surrender. Internal communications continue. We intercept enough to know they are coordinated. This silence is intentional and organized. The room fell quiet. Finally, her second-in-command spoke the thought no one wanted to voice. Commander, what if they are not afraid of us? The words hung in the recycled air. Yalis wanted to dismiss them, to explain why every species feared the collective. But she had destroyed an island, and Earth had responded with nothing. She had threatened extinction, and 7 billion beings had answered with silence. They are afraid, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. They must be afraid. Fear is universal. Perhaps fear is not their dominant response. Yalis dismissed the council and stood alone on the observation deck. Below, Earth turned through its day-night cycle. Cities glowed. Traffic moved. Satellites orbited. Life continued as if the Dravine fleet were nothing more than clouds passing overhead. She had conquered species that worshipped the collective as gods after witnessing their power. She had broken civilizations that surrendered within hours just to spare their children. She had never faced a species that looked at annihilation and responded with silence. High Prelate Sortha's transmission arrived at midnight Earth time. Report, Commander. Your Eminence, they have not responded to our ultimatum. Increase the demonstrations. Destroy more targets. With respect, Your Eminence, destruction has not prompted response. I recommend patience. Patience. Sortha's ancient face twisted with something between amusement and contempt. No species requires more than 2 days to break, Commander. Clearly you have failed to establish proper fear. Correct this. The transmission ended. Yalis stared at the dark screen, then at the silent planet below. She had never failed a conquest. She had never questioned Dravine methods. But watching Earth ignore her fleet, she felt something she had not felt since childhood. She felt small, and somewhere in the silence, 7 billion humans waited. The whispers started on day 3. Dravine soldiers did not whisper. They had no cultural tradition of secrets between ranks. Yet aboard the flagship, and aboard every ship in the fleet, crew members gathered in corners and spoke in hushed tones about the planet below. My sleep cycle is disrupted, a weapons officer admitted to his companion. I keep waking to check the communication logs. They're always empty. I requested transfer to another assignment, the companion replied. Command denied it. They said the conquest would conclude soon. He paused. I do not think they believe their own words anymore. Yalis overheard such conversations 3 times in a single patrol of her ship. She disciplined no one. What would she say? She shared their unease. The silence had burrowed into her thoughts like a parasite, growing larger each hour. She ordered another demonstration. A second target, an abandoned industrial complex on a continent humans called Europe, vanished in nuclear fire. The explosion registered on every instrument aboard the fleet. Earth did not flinch. No transmissions. No panic evacuations. No leaders demanding negotiations. The cities nearest the destruction continued their routines as if nothing had happened. Workers went to jobs. Children attended schools. Life persisted with terrifying normalcy. Private Okonkwo received his first written orders since the silence began. Hand-delivered by a runner who had walked 40 kilometers to avoid electronic detection. Prepare defensive positions. Maintain silence. Help is coming. He read the note twice, then burned it as instructed. Around him, his unit dug trenches and assembled barriers made from whatever materials they could find. They worked without speaking, communicating through gestures refined over 3 days of practice. Something had changed in Okonkwo. The fear remained, but it had transformed into something harder, something patient. He watched the ships hanging in the sky and felt no urge to run. They wanted him to run. They wanted chaos and screaming and surrender. He would give them nothing. In Geneva, Dr. Halvorsen analyzed the intercepted Dravine communications with growing fascination. Their message frequency has increased by 400%, she reported. Ship-to-ship transmissions, queries to their homeworld, requests for historical precedents. They're searching their records for any species that behave this way. Will they find one? Mendes asked. No, we are unique in their experience. Every other civilization broke within 2 days. Many surrendered within hours. We are now past 72 hours of complete silence. Mendes leaned back in his chair. What does their psychology look like? Deteriorating. Command structures are sending reassuring messages to crews, which tells us crews need reassurance. Several officers have requested medical attention for sleep disorders. One ship reported a crew member who refused to look at Earth anymore, claiming the planet was watching him. They are afraid of us. They are afraid of what they do not understand. Fear follows unfamiliarity. We have become completely unfamiliar to them. Their entire psychological warfare model assumed predictable responses. We are not predictable. High Prelate Soratha's transmissions arrived more frequently now. 3 times on day 3. 4 times on day 4. Each demanded progress reports. Each received the same answer. No response from Earth. Your incompetence concerns me, Commander, Sorath growled during the final transmission of day 4. Perhaps I should send a commander capable of breaking primitives. Your Eminence, I respectfully suggest that these are not primitives. Their silence is coordinated across their entire world. 7 billion individuals maintaining communication discipline for 4 days. This suggests organizational capabilities we did not anticipate. Organizational capabilities? Sorath laughed, but the sound carried no humor. They are animals. They fight wars over resources that exist in unlimited quantities throughout the galaxy. They poison their own atmosphere. They cannot even agree on basic governance structures. And yet they agree on silence, Your Eminence. The transmission ended abruptly. Yalis returned to her quarters and pulled up Earth's cultural database. She needed to understand what made humans different. The records showed a species of contradictions, violent yet compassionate, short-lived yet ambitious, fragmented yet capable of sudden unity. She found accounts of their wars, their atrocities, their capacity for cruelty toward their own kind. But she also found something else: stories of resistance. Stories of ordinary individuals standing against overwhelming force and refusing to break. One phrase appeared repeatedly across their history. They can kill us, but they cannot make us kneel. Yalis closed the file and stared at her reflection in the dark screen. She had built her career on making species kneel. She had believed it was simply a matter of applying sufficient pressure. Fear was a tool, and she wielded it with precision. But Earth had shown her something she had never considered. Some species could transform fear into defiance. Some species could look at death and choose silence over submission. On the morning of day 5, the first desertion occurred. 3 soldiers stole a shuttle and fled the system at maximum speed. They left no explanation, no message, no justification. They simply ran from a planet that refused to acknowledge them. Yalis reported the desertion to Sorith and braced for fury. Instead, Sorith's ancient face showed something worse than anger. It showed doubt. Perhaps, the High Prelate said slowly, we should reconsider our approach. Your Eminence? Not surrender. Never surrender. But perhaps these humans require different methods. Perhaps we should begin ground operations. Force them to respond through direct engagement. Yalis felt her stomach tighten. Ground operations against 7 billion unified enemies. Enemies who had spent 4 days preparing in complete silence. Enemies whose military capabilities remained hidden because they refused to display them. As you command, Your Eminence, she said. But in her chest, where instinct lived, the whisper had grown louder. It said something she had never thought before. We should not have come here. Below, Earth turned in silence, and humanity waited. Yalis could not remember the last time she blinked. She stood at the observation window, staring at Earth's night side, watching the patterns of city lights that spread across continents like neural networks. Cars moved. Trains ran. Planes flew between cities. 7 billion lives continued with mechanical precision, as if the fleet above them was nothing more than weather. And not one of those lives had acknowledged her existence in 5 days. Commander, her second-in-command approached carefully. The crew requests permission to reduce external sensor displays. Several officers report discomfort when viewing the planet. Discomfort. They describe a sensation of being observed. The planet, they say, appears to be looking back at them. Yalis wanted to dismiss this as superstition. She wanted to explain that planets could not look, could not think, could not judge. But standing at this window, watching Earth turn beneath her, she understood exactly what her crew meant. The humans were watching. Every satellite still functioning, every telescope still operational, every camera still recording. They documented the fleet's position, movements, and capabilities while broadcasting nothing in return. The Dravine had become specimens under observation. Denied, she said. We are conquerors. We do not hide from our conquests. But she could not shake the feeling that something had shifted. The predator had become prey. The watcher had become watched. In Geneva, Admiral Mendez reviewed intelligence reports that had accumulated over 5 days of silence. Human analysts had been busy. Without the need to respond to alien communications, they had focused entirely on gathering information. Their fleet operates on standard rotation schedules, Halvorsen explained, pointing at holographic displays. Watch changes occur at predictable intervals. Their weapons systems require charging cycles we have now mapped completely, and their psychological state continues to deteriorate. How badly? Internal communications show command attempting to reassure crews that conquest will succeed. Such messages have increased tenfold. When leadership must constantly repeat that everything is fine, everything is not fine. Mendez nodded slowly. And our preparations? Complete. Orbital defense platforms are armed and positioned. Hidden launch sites confirmed ready. Our allied contacts have confirmed they will honor their agreements if we survive to the deadline. Allied contact. Halvorsen smiled grimly. The Dravine have conquered 400 worlds. Not every species accepted subjugation. Some have been waiting for a species that could stand against the collective. We have been in communication with resistance networks across a dozen systems. They're watching this confrontation very closely. Mendez absorbed this information. Humanity had spent 5 days in silence, but that silence had been far from passive. They had mapped enemy weaknesses. They had coordinated global defenses. They had established contact with potential allies, all while appearing to do nothing at all. The Dravine think we are paralyzed with fear, he said. The Dravine have no idea what we are. Private Okonkwo's unit received new orders on the evening of day 5. They would not retreat if invasion came. They would not surrender. They would fight from prepared positions until victory or death. trusting that humanity's plan would unfold as promised. Okonkwo accepted these orders without fear. 5 days of silence had changed him. He had discovered something within himself that he had never known existed: the ability to face extinction and choose defiance anyway. Around him, soldiers from every nation on Earth prepared for war. They spoke no words, but their faces said everything. They would not kneel. They would not beg. Whatever came next, they would face it standing. Aboard the flagship, Yalis received an intelligence report that chilled her blood. "Commander, we have analyzed human facial expressions from our surveillance footage. Our psychological interpreters have reached consensus on their emotional state, which is, they're smiling, Commander. When humans look at the sky, toward our fleet, they are smiling." Yalis stared at the report. Smiling indicates happiness in human expression patterns. Why would they be happy? Unknown. But the pattern is consistent across multiple continents and demographic groups. They look at us, and they smile. She dismissed the officer and returned to the observation window. Smiling. 7 billion beings facing annihilation, and they smiled at their executioners. Either humans were insane, or they knew something the Dravine did not. High Prelate Sortha's transmission arrived at midnight. "Commander, I have made a decision. Dawn on their 6th day, you will begin ground operations. Land forces on multiple continents. Force engagement. Make them respond. Your Eminence, ground operations without psychological dominance established carry significant risk. We have no intelligence on their defensive preparations. Their silence has prevented standard reconnaissance. Then you will learn their capabilities by testing them. I will not report to the Collective Council that we spent 7 days hovering above a silent planet. We will have submission or we will have destruction. Either serves the Collective's reputation. As you command, Your Eminence." The transmission ended. Yalis turned to her officers and began issuing orders for the assault. But her hands trembled slightly, and her voice carried a tension that her crew had never heard before. In Geneva, Dr. Halvorsen detected the change in Dravine communications immediately. "They are preparing to land troops," she announced. "Multiple assault craft are being readied. Deployment appears scheduled for tomorrow." Mendez stood and stretched muscles that had grown stiff from days of waiting. "Then the silence ends tomorrow. You have something planned?" "Doctor, we have spent 5 days watching them fall apart. We have mapped their weaknesses, positioned our defenses, and established alliances they do not know exist. We have turned their psychological warfare against them completely." He walked toward the communication console that had remained dark for 5 days. "Tomorrow we speak. And when we do, they will learn what silence really meant." Halvorsen watched him go, then returned to her analysis of Dravine communications. Their messages had become desperate, confused, filled with requests for guidance that never came. An empire built on psychological dominance was crumbling under the weight of a single question they could not answer. Why were the humans not afraid? On Earth's surface, 7 billion people slept peacefully, ready for whatever dawn would bring. They had proven something no species had proven before. They had shown the galaxy that fear was a choice, not a requirement. And tomorrow, they would show what humanity could do when it finally chose to speak. Yalis had not slept in 43 hours. Her eyes burned. Her thoughts moved through fog. But sleep would not come because every time she closed her eyes, she saw Earth turning below her, silent and patient and waiting for something she could not name. The flagship's corridors had changed. Soldiers walked faster, spoke less, avoided eye contact. The confidence that had carried the Dravine through 400 conquests had evaporated like water on hot metal. Something had replaced it, a nervousness that spread through the fleet like disease. 3 more deserters fled during the night. 2 soldiers requested medical relief for psychological distress. One officer was found in his quarters, staring at a blank wall, mumbling about eyes in the darkness. "Commander," her second-in-command reported, "ground assault preparations are complete. Troops are ready for deployment. Morale assessment? Poor, Commander. Many soldiers have expressed reluctance to land on a world that has not responded to our presence. They fear what the silence might conceal." Yalis understood their fear because she shared it. 6 days of nothing had accomplished what no enemy fleet, no desperate resistance, no battlefield courage had ever achieved. It had made the Dravine afraid. She accessed the historical archives one final time, searching for anything that might explain human behavior. And she found a passage that stopped her cold. Humans have a proverb. The translation read, "Speak softly and carry a big stick." It means, those with true power need not shout. Only the weak announce their strength. The powerful simply wait. Yalis closed the file with trembling claws. High Prelate Soreth appeared on her screen, his ancient face twisted with barely controlled rage. "Report, Commander. Assault forces are ready, Your Eminence. Deployment will begin within the hour." "Good. I want this planet broken before sunset." The Collective Council has begun asking questions I cannot answer. They want to know why a primitive species has resisted for 6 days. They want to know if our methods have failed. Our methods have not failed, Your Eminence. The humans have simply found a way to resist them that we did not anticipate. Then anticipate it now. Break them. Force them to kneel or force them to die. I do not care which, but I will not tolerate continued silence. Understood, Your Eminence. The transmission ended. Yalis stood alone on her command deck, surrounded by screens showing a world that had chosen to wait rather than fight, to prepare rather than panic. And for the first time in her career, she wished she could run. In Geneva, Admiral Mendez watched the assault preparations through captured satellite feeds. Dravine drop ships were loading troops. Weapons systems were charging. The fleet was positioning for planetary bombardment support. "It is time," Halvorsen said quietly. Mendez nodded and walked to the communication console that had remained dark for 6 days. Engineers had prepared it during the silence, configuring it to broadcast on every frequency the Dravine monitored. When he spoke, every ship in the fleet would hear him. He placed his hand on the activation switch and paused. For 6 days, humanity had proven its patience. Now it would prove something else. He activated the broadcast. On every Dravine ship, screens that had shown nothing but static for 6 days suddenly flickered to life. A human face appeared, older, weathered, calm. Behind him, other humans stood in unified silence. Yalis froze when the image appeared. Around her, officers stumbled backward from their stations. The silence had finally broken. "People of the Dravine Collective," the human said. His voice was soft, almost gentle. "My name is Rosario Mendez. I speak for Earth." Yalis leaned forward, desperate to hear, desperate to understand. "You arrived 6 days ago with threats and demonstrations of power. You expected us to beg for mercy. You expected us to fracture and fight among ourselves. You expected us to follow the pattern of every species you have conquered." Mendez paused, and something like a smile crossed his face. "We chose differently. We chose silence. Not because we were afraid, but because we understood something you did not. Your power lies in our fear. Without our fear, you have nothing." Yalis felt her legs weaken. She gripped her console for support. "For 6 days, we have watched you lose your confidence. We have watched your soldiers request transfers. We have watched your commanders send desperate messages for guidance. We have watched you fall apart under the weight of our silence." "He knows," her second-in-command whispered. "He knows everything. We also prepared. Your fleet positions have been mapped. Your weapons signatures have been analyzed. Your rotation schedules have been documented. And something else has happened that you did not anticipate." Mendez stepped aside, revealing a display showing dozens of alien symbols. "The species you conquered did not forget. They have been waiting for someone to stand against you. While you focused on our silence, we established contact with resistance networks across your empire. They are watching this confrontation, and they are ready." Yalis accessed external sensors. Anomalies were appearing at the edge of the system. Ships. Dozens of ships bearing signatures from conquered worlds. "You have 2 choices," Mendez continued. "Leave now, and tell your collective that this world was not worth the cost. Or stay, and learn what humans do when we finally decide to fight. We have spent 6 days watching you. We know your weaknesses. We know your fears." His voice hardened, "And we are not alone anymore." The transmission ended. Yalis stood in the silence that followed, surrounded by officers who could not meet her eyes. The screens showed alien ships entering the system, ships that should not exist, ships from species the collective had broken centuries ago. They had not broken. They had waited. And now they had found something they had never had before: hope that the collective could be defeated. High Prelate Soratha's transmission arrived, but his voice carried no authority anymore. "Retreat," he said. "All forces retreat. This conquest is postponed." Yalis gave the order without protest. The fleet began turning, preparing to flee a world they had come to subjugate. As her flagship moved toward open space, Yalis watched Earth grow smaller on her screens. The planet that had refused to speak, refused to fear, refused to break. She had learned something today that would haunt her forever. The Dravine had built an empire on making others afraid, but they had never learned what to do when fear found them instead. And somewhere below, Private Okonkwo and 7 billion others watched the ships flee, and finally, they allowed themselves to smile. 6 months after the fleet retreated, the galaxy remembered. News traveled slowly between star systems, but it traveled. Stories spread through trade routes and refugee networks and resistance cells that had survived centuries of Dravine dominance. The stories all began the same way. There was a species that looked at the collective's ultimatum and answered with nothing at all. On the former conquest worlds, beings who had spent generations serving Dravine masters began to whisper. If one species could resist, perhaps others could too. If silence could break the collective's confidence, perhaps other tactics might break their power. The Dravine Empire had survived through fear. Now that same fear worked against them. Commander Yalis resigned her commission 3 weeks after returning home. She could not explain why. When the review board demanded answers for the failed conquest, she told them the truth. Humanity had discovered a weapon the collective could not counter. They had discovered that fear required cooperation from its victims. They did not cooperate, she said simply. And we had no secondary strategy. High Prelate Sorath faced challenges from within the Collective Council for the first time in 4 centuries. Other prelates questioned his judgment, his methods, his leadership. The whispers that had started in conquered worlds had reached the capital itself. An empire built on 400 successful conquests could not survive one very public failure. On Earth, Admiral Mendez addressed the United Nations General Assembly for the first time since the silence ended. The chamber was packed with diplomats, military leaders, scientists, and representatives from 6 newly allied species who had traveled across the galaxy to meet the humans who had done what they could not. "We did not win through superior firepower," Mendez told the assembly. "We did not win through brilliant tactics or advanced technology. We won because we understood something fundamental about our enemy. They needed us to be afraid. Without our fear, their entire strategy collapsed." He paused, looking across the diverse faces before him. "For 6 days, humanity achieved something we had never achieved before: complete global unity. Every nation, every culture, every individual acted as one. We proved that when we choose to stand together, we are stronger than any force that tries to divide us." Dr. Halvorsen sat in the front row, watching the Alliance representatives take notes. The Dravine's former subjects had questions. They wanted to know how humanity had coordinated so perfectly. They wanted to know how 7 billion individuals had maintained discipline for 6 days. They wanted to learn. She would teach them. Already, plans were forming for a coalition of liberated worlds, bound together not by conquest, but by choice. The galaxy would never be the same. Private Okonkwo had returned to Lagos after the fleet departed. His sister's education was paid for now, funded by a grateful government that recognized the soldiers who had held the line in silence. He was offered promotions, medals, speaking engagements. He refused them all. "I did not do anything special," he told the reporters who tracked him down. "I just stood with my people. We all did. That is what humans do." But late at night, when he looked at the stars, he allowed himself to feel pride. He had been part of something unprecedented. He had proven that ordinary people, standing together in silence, could defeat an empire that had conquered worlds. The final message arrived 6 months after the retreat, broadcast across every frequency the Dravine monitored. It came from Earth, but it carried the signatures of 17 species who had joined the new coalition. The message contained no words. It contained 6 days of recorded silence, exactly 144 hours of nothing, followed by a single sound that needed no translation: 7 billion humans laughing together. The meaning was clear. We broke you with our silence, and now we celebrate your defeat with our joy. Your fear tactics have become our triumph. Your empire's greatest weapon has become its greatest weakness. Within a year, the Dravine collective began fracturing. Conquered worlds declared independence. Military commanders defected to the coalition. The ancient power structure that had ruled through terror could not survive the simple truth that humanity had revealed. Fear only works when people agree to be afraid. Yalis watched the collapse from her retirement. Far from the politics she had once served, she received occasional communications from human diplomats who wanted to understand Dravine history, Dravine culture, Dravine mistakes. She answered their questions honestly, finding unexpected peace in helping the species that had defeated her. One day, a human researcher asked her what she had felt when Earth remained silent. Yalis considered the question for a long time before answering. "I felt what your species wanted me to feel," she said finally. "I felt afraid, not of your weapons or your armies. I felt afraid of not understanding. I felt afraid of facing something I could not predict or control. Your silence was a mirror, and when I looked into it, I saw that all my power was borrowed from others' fear. When you refused to be afraid, I had nothing left." The researcher nodded and recorded her answer. Years later, historians would study the 7 days of silence as a turning point in galactic history. They would analyze the strategy, the psychology, the careful coordination that made it possible. They would write academic papers and popular books about how one species changed the balance of power across 1,000 light years. But for the humans who lived through it, the lesson was simpler. When the darkness comes, when the threat appears, when the powerful demand that you kneel, you have a choice. You can scream and beg and hope for mercy, or you can stand together in silence and let your unity speak louder than any words. Humanité chose silence. And in that silence, they found their voice. The galaxy would remember. The galaxy would learn. And the Dravine, scattered and diminished, would never forget the species that taught them the true meaning of fear. Sometimes, the most terrifying thing in the universe is a world that refuses to be afraid.